Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I think we can make a start. Good morning. So welcome to this meeting of Mid-Suffolk District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Andy Mellon, leader of Mid-Suffolk District Council, and I will be chairing the meeting. Just to quickly remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations while others are speaking. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones and other technology are on silent or switched off. And finally, we'll be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app, so please could Cabinet members make sure they are logged in and ready to use the app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast, or is being broadcast live to the internet, and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. And the Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. Can I move to the agenda, please? Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies on Councillor Rachel Eburn and Councillor David Penny.
Thank you. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interests by members. Are there any to declare? None, thank you. Item 3, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
Item 5, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There are no matters referred, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6 is the forthcoming decisions list. I'm sure we've all had a look at that. Any comments or queries on that? There are none. Okay, then we move on to Item 7, which is the first of the substantive items. This is paper MCA/24/33, the 25-26 draft general fund budget and medium-term financial position. I just want to thank Councillors Winch and Councillor Pearson and Melissa and the team for their work in preparing these budget papers. And just to confirm that the route these papers will take, they are here today in draft form. They will go to Overview and Scrutiny next week. They will come back to Cabinet in February and go to Council, full Council in February as well. And somewhere in the mix we will get the local government financial settlement as well, which may change things. So they've got quite a long way to go. This is the first step anyway, and I would like now to invite the Cabinet Member for Housing and Property, Councillor Winch, to introduce the report.
Thank you. I'd like to start by just tweaking recommendation 3.1. So at the moment it says that the draft general fund budget and the medium-term financial position set out in the report be endorsed, subject to consideration at the next Cabinet meeting following consideration at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like that to be amended to say that it'll get to the next Cabinet meeting, Feb 2025, following consideration at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, 19th of December 2024, and reprofiling, where appropriate, the proposed capital budget and capital ambitious programme, together with a review of the consequent impact on capital financing costs. So just to be clear, what we're saying there, as well as going through Overview and Scrutiny, we will be reviewing the phasing of some of the capital budget and capital ambitions programme. Okay, so I'm going to try and give a summary of this budget and I'm going to split it into 5 different areas. So very briefly, what's happened this year. We're coming back to that, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I think we need to start there. Secondly, the draft budget for next year and the core capital programme. Then talk about our ambition programme. Then look at the medium-term financial position, and then a couple of conclusions. So, what's happened this year? So the latest view shows a £6.7 million surplus compared to a budgeted surplus of 5.2 million. So that's an increase of 29% over budget. And our earmarked reserves will have moved from 28.8 million to 50.4 million. These have been increased by the Gateway 14 dividend and capital receipts. At the same time, our revised capital budget totaled 10.7 million, a reduction of 14 million. So I think the conclusions are that Mid-Suffolk District Council will have an exceptionally good financial year this year, and we're building up very substantial reserves. We are mindful that there can be delay in projects as reflected in the capital programme, but I think we've had such a good year, it's made us mindful that we need to think about our council taxpayers and our fees and charges. And that's the core logic for our decision on the council tax levels. So moving into the budget for 25-26, I'm going to split this into revenue and capital. So the draft budget for next year is showing a surplus of 4.3 million. We've got a 4.3% increase in total funding. That's government grants, business rates and council tax. And that's made up of an 8% rise in business rates, a decline in grant funding because the Rural Services Delivery Grant has been scrapped. I'll come back to that later. And for the budget, we've assumed a 0 increase in council tax, but there's actually a volume increase of 2.3%. We are, in principle, brought into the theory that it is best to increment the council tax gradually every year. However, as this has been such an exceptional year, we've decided to go ahead with a 0 increase. In the report, it mentions that our total net cost of services have increased by 12%, which is always something that alarms me because I don't like the income going up by a percentage and costs going up by a much bigger percentage. But if you take out the pooled investments, £1 million, and if you take out the previous budget glitch for premises costs, you can see there's actually not much of a change there. We've assumed that if you look at employee costs, they rise by about 5%. There's a 3% pay increase along with a 2% scale point increase. And we're assuming that the NI increase will be covered by new burdens funding. Our major contracts, that's domestic waste, garden waste, trade waste, the IT contract with Suffolk County Council and the shared revenue partnership have inflationary increases incorporated. And our fees and charges are held at 1.7%, but we're anticipating a 9.5% in volume. If you look at the capital financing charges, these are actually quite difficult to compare versus the last budget because we've changed the methodology. And what I tend to do is compare the budget with the Q2 outlook because it's easier to see what's going on. But you'll see the main variances around the 1 million pooled investment provision, reduced interest payable on short-term borrowing because we've had the Gateway 14 dividend and we've reduced short-term borrowing, a reduction in interest receivable on short-term investments, which comes from the fact that issues we've had on our pooled investments, and there's a revenue contribution to capital coming in, which is related to the Innovation Centre and Gateway 14. Just moving on to the capital budget. So we have a capital budget of 29 million in 24-25. And this incorporates any carryovers from, incorporates things which were already approved or things which we really think we have to do. So the Disabled Facilities Grant, which is grant funded, simpler recycling, which is mandated by government, public rail maintenance and enhancements, community infrastructure projects, which is mainly SIL, leisure facilities maintenance, our depot reconfiguration because we haven't identified a suitable site for a new depot, so we have to put certain changes in place, the Stowmarket Shelf project, the Innovation Centre and Cosy Homes. Just looking at that in terms of split by spend, the Innovation Centre's 31% of the capital budget, communities and SIL 23%, Shelf and the Depot project and other property 14%, simpler recycling 9%. And a profile of how this will be funded, 26% from borrowing, 23% from grants, 23% from SIL, and 23% from reserves. In order to help achieve this, Mid-Suffolk have agreed to take a greater share of officer resources in key areas for 25-26, and these are in the budget. These will be reviewed going forward depending on financial pressures, but we've included 313k of additional costs from the financial split between Bayborough and Mid-Suffolk. Moving on to the ambition programme. So on top of this, we would like to overlay and make a bit more explicit our action plan and capital ambition programme. Our aim here is to lay out everything that we're trying to achieve over the medium term. For understanding, this programme is to be funded via the Gateway 14 dividend, which will fund the Mid-Suffolk Plan Implementation Reserve. This provisionally states an opening balance of 19.2 million with an additional 26.4 million in dividends over the plan period. The exact timing of the programme is therefore subject to this funding profile, as well as a detailed financial appraisal of each element before they're signed off. It's clear there's no point in defining an ambitious capital programme without additional resourcing to make this work. And we've identified a number of additional areas where resources will be required, which are explained in Appendix C. And this covers items like cost of living support, improved access to the council, support for energy saving initiatives, ongoing support for Stowmarket regeneration and towns in the wider district, support for sports and leisure in Stowmarket and the wider district, land for biodiversity or public access, support for cycleways and footpaths, waste and recycling reviews, support and planning for planning, such as neighbourhood plans. The revenue budget includes 950k revenue funded from reserves for the Mid-Suffolk Plan. Our ambition is also to expand the capital programme to potentially cover development of a new depot when a suitable site is identified, expansion of temporary accommodation to avoid homeless residents being put into bed and breakfast accommodation and save on costs going to private providers, extension of the shelf project in Stowmarket and provision of facilities in the wider district, supporting regeneration in towns outside of Stowmarket, support for an eco-hub to be an advice centre for the district, support for the long-term plans for the Food Museum, establishing an offer for solar for business in conjunction with West Suffolk District Council, which would have an income stream, investment in land for biodiversity and public access, investment in exemplar housing, and potential use of the general fund to alleviate pressure in the HRA. Each of the items on our action plan and capital ambition plan needs to be separately evaluated before proceeding. Our earmarked reserves have now been split into financial resilience and risk reserves, operational delivery and service reserves, and investing in the district. And I do think, regardless of the numbers, it helps clarify what's going on, and that's some of the background to the recommendation in 3.2 about the movement of reserves. Our reserves on the current budget would move from 50.4 million to 23.9 million over the medium term, and they're described in Appendix D. I just want to now move on to the medium-term financial position and how all of that overlays the view looking forward. So the assumption looking forward is that Mid-Suffolk will be disadvantaged by local government reforms that will be introduced in 2026-27 onwards. Any fair funding review will move funding towards those authorities with high levels of deprivation. In addition, for many Shire district authorities, including Mid-Suffolk, a full business rates baseline reset could result in significant funding losses. Until a couple of weeks ago, I was a lot more optimistic about the likely funding position. We now know for certain that the risks are real. For example, on November the 28th, 2024, the government abolished the Rural Services Delivery Grant, which during the process of this budget immediately resulted in 588 hole in the budget. The medium-term forecast that in front of you is suggesting a drop of 3.8 million in income over a single financial year, which will have a major impact on the viability of the council's finances and, for that matter, any rural district council in England. If there is a newspaper headline here, it's not really about council tax level, it's about the impact that the Labour government will have in forcing rural district councils into immediate financial crisis. The medium-term financial position assumes the following on income. Government grants will drop off a cliff and go to zero in 2026-27. Business rates are reduced and drop off to 1 million in 26-27 and not recovering to current levels before 2030, and investment income remains static. These figures assume that after this year we will increase council tax by 2% a year. There's also potential other risks with inflation, pressure on pay, and of course interest rates with an uncertain international situation. On the other side, the medium-term financial position has no remedial actions in terms of increased charges or cost savings that might need to be implemented. And on a point of detail, the numbers don't include any modelling for income for extended producer responsibility, the Innovation Centre, solar for business, or temporary accommodation, even though all the costs are included. So this is very much a worst-case scenario. Owing to the rush in getting these budget papers out for overview and scrutiny, which was obviously going to be very beneficial, but we've had little time to discuss the medium-term financial position in detail. There are three main areas where we need further discussion prior to the final presentation of the budget. The level of reserves, which we're currently forecasting at 24 million. For context, we had an opening balance in 24-25 of 29 million. Our fixed costs, if this scenario comes about, we obviously need to be extremely careful about additions to our fixed costs in 25-26 to ensure we don't reduce our flexibility going forward. And I think it would be useful to have a separate section in this budget clarifying exactly what's happening to fixed costs. And then the final area, which is the most significant, is the impact of our programme on the financing costs, which is one of the reasons we want to look at the profiling that in relation to the latest forecast and assuming that we will be impacted in such a significant way by government changes. So, conclusions. This budget lays out our ambitions over the medium term. We're fully aware that there are currently a number of significant uncertainties relating to the financing and organisation of local government, and these will be regularly reviewed and ultimately may require priorities to be revised. However, at this point, we believe that inertia is not an appropriate response. We wish to set out a plan to deliver the mandate given to us by voters in Mid-Suffolk. In any event, no items on the capital ambition commitments will be made until the future income from which they will be funded is certain and a separate business case brought forward. We'll be profiling the timing where appropriate of the capital programme, action plan resources and ambition programme in light of the potential significant drop-off in income that may result. Thank you.
Thank you. So we need a seconder. Any seconder from the Cabinet? Councillor Weller, thank you very much. So we've got plenty of time for questions. Any questions initially from Cabinet members? Councillor Davis.
Yes, I've got a question, or a request really. Is it possible that when we go through the financing, you put me over here. Thank you, Mandy. When we go through the capital financing, reviewing it in January, that we can seriously look at getting rid of our pooled investment funds and looking at the impact of having that as liquidity rather than borrowing more over that medium-term time.
Do you want to answer that, Melissa?
February, we will be bringing the Treasury strategy back to you, so that will be the opportunity where we can have a look at those pooled funds. I think, and I said this at Council the other month, because those pooled funds are valued at less than what we paid for them, I think we need to be really careful about the timing of selling any of those investments, but it's certainly one we do want to consider with the ESG priority that we want to move forward, so we will be having a look at that in the strategy as well.
Any other questions? Okay. Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Scarf, I'm sure you have one or two questions. Councillor Scarf first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I've got 4 on the general fund. The first question would be, fees and charges are increasing by the rate of inflation, which is 1.7%, and I understand the reasoning for that, but however, some do not give full cost recovery as yet. Mention is made in the papers of full cost recovery in future years. Over what period of time would you think this to be reasonable?
I think over a few years. We would like to slowly move in that direction. I think we didn't feel it was justifiable this year because of the very significant surplus that we had. But the other proviso I've got is I don't think you can just move all your costs to full cost recovery without some kind of benchmarking or value for money exercise. So that needs to happen at the same time.
Okay, I'll continue then. Hopefully I'm not asking any of John's questions. Paragraph 7.5. Will by the time full council actually sees this budget, the head of finance be able to confirm what the likely increase in costs are regarding the finance team? Because I know there's no provision within this draft budget at this moment in time.
I'll pass it over to Melissa, but I think it is a fair point. I think most people don't like something dropped into a budget that says there's additional cost, but they don't know what it is. I think that's a fair point.
Right. Yeah, we currently are working on this, and I know David Fevier-Ward, I don't know if everyone has met David, he's the new head of finance. He is having a look at that structure at the moment and putting together those costs, so we will be taking that back to the senior leadership team next week to have a look at. Some of those costs will be capital and some of those costs will be attributed to the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account as well, so it won't all have an impact on the general fund if there are additional costs that we need to build in. Just to also add to that, in the budget for this year, we did increase the budget for finance for interim costs as well, so obviously that is quite an expensive overhead, so with a view to moving to a more permanent structure, we're hoping there will, we'll reduce that reliance or eliminate that reliance completely on interims.
Very much. The £313,000 increase in employee costs is mentioned. This is the redistribution of the shared costs between us and our partner council, and presumably now fairly covers our element of that cost. I'm presuming that leads to a decrease in Baber's costs, but not necessarily of the same amount. However, the question would be, are Mid Suffolk in any way cross-subsidising our partner council now?
I don't believe so. So there's a written agreement for 12 months, and that was done by going through each area, looking at what actual activity is going on. So it's obvious at the moment, say in the property area, there's a lot of work going on, Shelf Innovation Centre. So it was trying to apportion that fairly between the two separate councils. We're obviously reserving the right to unravel that if we needed to for financial reasons going forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm reassured by that. Mention is made in the paperwork the new homes bonus. Obviously, this is a bonus. This is the last year that we will receive it, although we've been told for years that it's the last year that we will receive it, but I suspect it really is the last year that we receive it. This obviously has a great role to play in the medium-term financial position going forward as we move into a negative position within a couple of years. Nothing is certain, but would it not be unreasonable to expect that central government will, bearing in mind their ambitious targets for housing, put in place a scheme to replace it? I know you can't include something that you don't know, but I just wondered whether you thought that that might be the case, because I think that might drastically alter the MTFP going forward.
I'll get Melissa to come in. I would say there is a possibility, but we definitely couldn't be putting it in any forecast because I think it would be misleading. My reservation will be, will they favour rural councils like ourselves with the allocation of sums? That would be my reservation, but I don't know if you want to come in, Melissa.
Yeah, I haven't seen or heard anything that's coming out, and we've been talking to Pixel as well, who have links into central government, and they haven't sort of raised any financial benefits that will come our way. And I think, as Councillor Winch mentioned, any additional funds will go to county councils have got adults and social care and children's pressures as well, and the deprivation factor plays into that as well. I don't think we will see any new money because we're not classified as a council that has high deprivation, although there are pockets across the district.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say, as a sort of opening comment, that I think it's a very well presented report, very clear and concise, and I say that someone had my name to 7 early reports. I think this is probably the best budget report I've seen in terms of presentation. So, can also say I'm pleased to say that I think from both sides of the council chamber that we are really concerned about the impact this Labour government will have on rural councils. It may be by the time at the end of this period when all the farmland is sold off at distressed prices and the solar PV is everywhere, perhaps we won't be a rural council anyway, so maybe. In terms of questions, the previous budget report, it said under capital, the most significant items included are construction of a new depot to be shared with Baber District Council. That was listed in advance of the Skills and Innovation Centre and the Shelf, and certainly our previous administration were given quite a hard sell by officers in terms of the need for a new depot. But it's now relegated to the Capital Ambition programme, which Baber described Capital Ambition as not financed and no financial costs included in the revenue budget. So what is the situation here?
Okay.
Is it a dream or is it a reality?
Well, at the moment, it's not a reality. So the issue here is we haven't been able to identify a suitable site for the depot. We did identify some potential sites, but from an operational point of view, they weren't deemed as okay. So literally we've had to backtrack from that, and we're going to have to spend money on our current depot, which isn't something that we particularly want to do, but sometimes you have to face reality. We haven't abandoned the search. In fact, I think there's additional resource looking at that at the moment, or about to look. Going to look at the refurbishment of the depots first and then look at this. So we're hoping to get that back on track. And that's the reason for that. It wasn't a conscious decision that we didn't want to do it. It was facing the fact that we haven't identified a suitable site.
Looking at the medium-term strategy, 4 or 5 years, we're going from a surplus of 4.4 million to a deficit of 2.7 million, which is a swing of £7 million. Interestingly, Baber's going from a 361 deficit to a 2.65 deficit, which is only a swing of 2.29 million. But we actually end up at the moment, our medium-term financial strategy, with a deficit, in-year deficit at the last year, which is worse than Baber's. Well, I assume that you're not taking Baber's financial approach as your inspiration, but why do you think your change is just so drastically higher than Baber's, the 7 million compared to a swing of 2.2?
There's 3 reasons for that. Number one, Baber are putting a lot of onus on their residents to pay more. Number 2, Baber aren't particularly doing significant activities in the district like we're planning. Number 3, and the point that we accept, which is why we're looking at the profiling, is the level of capital financing charges in the medium-term view.
Thank you.
Sorry, Melissa wants to come in on something.
Add to that is the level of new homes bonus that Mid-Suffolk receive as well is far greater than Baber's new homes bonus. So once that drops out, obviously that is a significant impact for Mid-Suffolk.
Paragraph 4.9 describes the MT, the medium-term financial programme, as not sustainable over the longer term. So I guess the question is, are the ambitions of this administration for its Mid-Suffolk plan actually incompatible with prudent financial stewardship?
If I roll every council in the UK, is there anyone you can name that's viable in the longer term?
Okay. Just getting down to more nitty-gritty. In paragraph 8.5, where it looks at fee income, the schedule shows a separation between volume increases and price increases, but it seems to, under planning income, all the increase is volume related and there's no fee change. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think the planning fees are set externally and they're not increasing. Correct? Yeah. Yeah, they're not increasing.
So, and there's no scope
The
to
volume's
do that?
increasing, but the actual amounts and the level of fee is not increasing.
And there's no scope to do that?
Apparently not.
Any further questions? If not, then we can move into debate. I can now open this item up for debate. Anyone like to contribute? Councillor Stringer, thank you.
Thank you. I haven't put my card on that. Apologies, I'll be Tim Weller. Hard act to follow. Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Councillor Whitehead. I think the report is incredibly well laid out. I'm not hugely au fait with finances and the way balance sheets are written, etc., but even I could follow this. So thank you for writing such an accessible document from an inaccessible discipline. So thank you to everyone for doing that. And actually, I think the presentation was really helpful as well. Thank you, Councillor Winch, in terms of laying out our ambitions as well as our challenges. And I think what you can see here is a very open and honest and transparent set of plans and expenditure without anything being hidden away, but also the risks aren't hidden away either, and they're clearly there, but they're there for every council. But we're here to try and deliver an ambitious programme, and there it is laid out for all to see. And welcome this document, if approved in a moment, going through the scrutiny process and others having a look. And obviously we're not saying that this is all of the ideas laid out in the best possible way. Let's see if there are other ideas coming in here about how we could do things even better than we have laid out at present. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll just make a couple of comments from here. Thank you, Councillor Winch and Councillor Pearson. I know you've both been working hard on this with the officers. Clearly, there's still a significant amount of uncertainty, particularly until we get the local government finance settlement, hopefully next week, and other uncertainties in the mix as well. But it does, I think the paper presents an ambitious plan in an uncertain world, and I'm happy to support it. In terms of looking forward in the medium-term financial plan, it's right that we are somewhat pessimistic in our views, and hopefully things will turn out to be not as bad as presented. But we do have the possibility of government grants going down for rural areas. We have the business rates reset and other changes coming. So I think it's right to do a fairly pessimistic forecast and hope that things will not be as bad as set out. I'm not going to read the full recommendations because they're pretty long, but I will just read out the 3.1, which is the one that's been amended. So that's the draft general fund budget proposals. Oh, sorry, Tim. Go for it, Tim, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make one more comment in debate for transparency, really, because during the course of that, while we were hearing from Councillor Winch, I spotted what appears to be a typo, and I was trying to get a response quickly from the Director of Finance. We've got one now. So there is what I believe is a typo on page 30. So I'm just raising it for transparency. on page 30 in relation to food waste at 11.2C, the budget is set for 1.3 million, but on page 43 there's a table where it's set at 1.4. I've been advised that that is a typo, and the information on page 43 is correct, 1.4. So we'll remedy that in later papers, but I just wanted to raise it here so that just for clarity and transparency, that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that clarification, Councillor Weller. Well spotted. I'm sure scrutiny would have got it next week anyway. But, I'm just going to read out recommendation 3.1 as amended, that the draft general fund budget proposals for 25-26 and the medium-term financial plan set out in the report be endorsed for recommendation to Council on the 27th of February 2025, subject to further consideration at the next Cabinet meeting on the 11th of February 2025, following, firstly, consideration at Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 19th of December 2024, and secondly, reprofiling, where appropriate, of the proposed capital budget and capital ambitions programme, together with the review of the consequent impact on capital financing costs. The other recommendations, 3.2 and 3.3, are as tabled, and I will now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 5 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 8. This is paper MCA/24/34, a housing revenue account 25-26 draft budget and 30-year business plan. And I will again invite Councillor Winch to introduce the report.
Okay, so I don't want to labour this too much, but we do need to talk a little bit about the background to the housing service, because you just can't get away from this reality. It's an extremely difficult background. So we've talked many times before about the difficulty of funding everything from the rental income from council houses, because repairs and maintenance, all the regulation that we're getting, the decarbonisation of housing stock, the negative impact of right to buy, the building of all new council houses, and the servicing of this huge debt that we've got. It's always going to be an extremely difficult financial situation. There's also a lot of other factors. We've still got a repairs backlog from COVID. We had a recent economic spike with price escalation, materials, labour and energy. We had the imposition of the 1% a year rent cuts from April 2016 and a below inflation settlement last year. The ongoing regulatory requirements, the condition of our housing stock. So we've just had we're getting an up-to-date stock condition survey, but that shows there's even more work than we perhaps thought. And we have had a history of poor service, for which is a transformation underway. So just a quick summary of the budget. We're anticipating a deficit of just over 2 million, and this is on top of an anticipated deficit of 2.3 million for the current financial year. And our reserves will end up at 2.9 million at the end of 26. The assumptions in the budget are that our rents will increase by 2.7%. Something I just need to mention on service charges, we've probably assumed a higher level of service charges in this budget than would actually come about. We've got a separate discussion and decision to make on service charges. In principle, we are bought into the idea that we need to charge tenants for the services they use and get to cost recovery, but we can't be introducing massive increases in costs in a single year. So probably the income from the service charges will drop a little bit in the next iteration of this budget. We've assumed an increase in void costs, so that's 1.5% of rental value as opposed to 1%. we've assumed a 3% increase in salaries with incremental increases. We get a hit to the NI because, of course, while you get new burdens funding for the general fund, the assumption is, well, council tenants can afford to pay for everything anyway, so let's leave them alone. We've restated our depreciation this year back to 2021, spreading the life of the assets over 50 years, which has had quite a significant impact on the HRA, and we have now come out the other end of revising the method of apportioning interest between the general fund and the HRA, which had a serious negative effect on the HRA and a consequent benefit to our general fund. This year, so one of the things that I always struggle with the HRA is every time I look at the numbers, they're worse than I saw last time. So this year, we've tried to get to a point where we all really 100% believe that this budget is something that will be carried out. So we've added £1 million to the repairs budget because there is so much activity and need going on that we just need to be realistic that now isn't the time that we can get ourselves back to a sensible financial position. And we've increased our adaptations budget by 100k. So I think we've taken the view that we have to have another year of significant deficit before we can get this into a good state. On the capital programme, we've got a significant decarbonisation programme planned, and we've applied for funding for what's called Wave 3. We got funding for Wave 2. So we're planning to do 2.3 million worth of decarbonisation in 25-26 and another 2.5 in 26-27. We've got very significant investment in roofing. That's £12 million in total over the next 2 years. And these things all feed into reducing the repairs in the long term. We've got a heating programme of over £1 million a year and significant estate improvements planned. The other side of that is you look at, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but if you look at the capital programme, effectively you'll see the collapse of our new build programme. So it's coming down from 7.6 million to 3.9 million, and then it's virtually disappearing. If we look longer term at the HRA business plan, in fact, the long-term HRA business plan looks a lot better than last time we presented it. There are things that have made it worse, so we've included additional capital budgets for voids, rewiring sheltered units, which weren't included in the original business plan. We've increased the voids, which I mentioned, to 1.25%, and we've worked through the whole interest arrangement, so that made it a bit worse. But there are things that significantly help the longer term, so they are the depreciation changes, the introduction of 5% tolerance on relets, the rollout of service charges on general needs and the general increase in service charges longer term, the reduction in right to buys, which we've assumed at 6 per year, the use of capital receipts to reduce interest payments, and the end of the build programme in 26-27. We haven't included in fact, we haven't included everything that we might do on service charges, and we haven't included something that we're looking at as to whether we could transfer land from the HRA to general fund, and we put something in the general fund budget for that. But this plan suggests we will get into a surplus position in 3 to 4 years' time, and we don't consume our reserves for the foreseeable future, which is the first time I've seen a business plan that suggests that. However, our borrowing just continues to escalate from 125 million to over 160 million by 2030. So, conclusion, the situation of the HRA is extremely difficult and is taking us longer than hoped to get to a surplus position. Our longer term scenario is now looking better than when we last reported for the reasons discussed above, and we're now not looking to consume our reserves in the foreseeable future. There's a huge amount of work going on to improve our service, but there's still some way to go. We've really got on top of all our compliance activities, and they're due to come out of regulation next year. And as I said before, we've decided it's not realistic to address our current problems without an ongoing high level of spend for another year. The key theme of this budget and business plan is that we are refocusing all our efforts on improving our properties for existing tenants, and we will effectively be moving away from expanding our housing stock as it is currently unaffordable within the HRA constraints, unless we get significant government funding to do that. Ironically, it's exact opposite of what the government wants, but it's the likely route for a lot of councils and housing associations. Final remark, the financial numbers are all still a bit concerning, but I'm confident we are making strides in improving our service, and we just need to keep focused and motivated in doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Stringer, thank you. Any questions on this report from the Cabinet members? If not, any questions from Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Scarf?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was going to ask a question on the service charges, because when we had our opposition briefing last week, we were given a presentation of this report, which included within recommendations the service sheltered housing service charges and utility charges increases, and I see those have been dropped now from the report as presented to the public. But the budget assumptions are still, as you say, the budget assumptions are still within there, which includes some quite eye-watering increases that will be needed to ensure that the costs are correctly allocated and not subsidised by general stock residents. So I guess the question is, how much effort has been put in looking into how those costs can be reduced rather than just looking at how the income needs to go?
There's a very, very detailed review currently going on about all our service charges, and the reason we took that recommendation out is that review is coming to Cabinet in January, and that is going to go through the analysis of every single charge that's been made and how that's split. I don't know if you want to add anything, Deborah, or... You're okay, yeah. So the answer is there is a detailed report. The thing that I accept your main point, which is the extreme result of that slipped into this budget, which is why we took it out of the recommendation. And I accept that therefore means there is almost certainly going to be an adjustment of reducing the level of service charges in the budget as a consequence. And we don't want to do horrific changes in one go.
Could I just ask a question now on page 74, which I think is the first page of the HRI 30-year summary. We see, you mentioned about the finance capital going up from 125 million loan to over 266 million. The question is about the revolver. There's a column there, there's two columns, drawdown of revolver and repayment of revolver, but there's a figure every year drawing down the revolver, but under repayment of revolver, there's zero in every year. So it seems to me this seems to be a new definition of the word revolver. You know, is that really the best name for that loan?
You're probably right, but I'm going to get somebody to comment on that, but I take the point.
Yeah, so the revolver is just what we use in the sector, but it's really that's our borrowing from other councils and how much that will be costing us. But with the state of our business plan, unfortunately, we can't afford to repay any of that borrowing.
So this assumes that we'll be able to continue borrowing for the next 30 years, as you say, from other local councils at a reasonable rate. And presumably they aren't 30-year loans, so they are being repaid but then refinanced quite regularly.
That is correct, and I think that there's a bigger challenge here across all councils, not just ours, because all councils are in a similar position, but the central government is looking at this at the moment.
I mean, sorry, clearly in the long term it's totally unsustainable because we've moved to over 50% of the rents being used to maintain the loan if we went to the bottom of that chart.
And a second question on that particular page, does this schedule of finance, does it include all these what called item 8 loans from the general fund, or is this just external borrowing?
Yeah, yes, the item 8 loans are where the general fund then borrows from the other councils, so it's actually the same thing as the revolver borrowing.
So there are no hidden extra okay.
No.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. Page 62 refers to the budget assumptions, and in that we've allocated a 2% increase for supply or suppliers. Bearing in mind the increase in national insurance employee contributions, which ultimately suppliers will pay, do you think that that's a sufficient level in terms of an assumption? Because obviously the NI rises quite a lot.
Okay, I'm probably going to pass that over, but a lot of our contracts are set, but I will pass that over just for clarification.
So we're in the process of tendering our contracts, so we would have specific increases actually embedded in our contracts.
Second question would be, as mentioned in the general fund papers earlier, the council is looking at whether it can utilise its usable capital receipts reserve and other reserves, revenue reserves, towards the capital funding of the HRA. I really hope we can. How far are we down the line with this in terms of where have we got to? Have we been talking to central government or the civil service or whatever?
Two different elements to this. One is the capital receipts thing, which I think we're okay on, and I think we've assumed that in the HRA business plan. And I can't remember now, but our capital receipts are going to be in the order of 4 to 5 million, that sort of number. Yeah, that sort of number. Yeah. 3 to 4 million. Yeah. And they are in the HRA business plan 3, I'm being told then. Then there's the other issue of could we transfer land from the HRA to the general fund, and the general fund would effectively fund that, which is something we've got in our capital programme in the other budget. That is a little bit more murky as to what you're allowed to do and what the process is, and we're getting advice on that at the moment. So that hasn't been included in the HRA business plan going forward.
And then final question, there's a consultation on the general needs service charge, which is a new element coming in early in next year. So will any of the, I mean, we don't know what the consultation will say, but will any of those proposed changes come in time for this year's budget, or would they be in a further year's budget?
I think, just to clarify, we're assuming that we will implement some of the general needs service charging. It's just to what degree do we do it in 1 year, but we will be doing something. Sorry, that's subject to a cabinet vote. That's the presumption.
If no further questions, then this item can be opened up for debate. Who'd like to contribute to the debate? Councillor Stringer.
Better do a little something. The rhetoric from government in the last 24 hours has been interesting. If you read what's been going through the media about needing to build homes and how thousands and thousands of these are going to be affordable and social homes, and then you read this document, you think, how? And that doesn't mean this administration's been going, oh dear, that's something we can't solve. We've had a summit, did you call it a summit the other week with housing providers? And it was more like a therapy session than anything else, because every single part of the social housing and affordable housing delivery sector is in not dissimilar position to us in terms of how this is all stacked up and financially. So I think consistently these documents are saying if the government is serious about us delivering the amount of affordable and social homes that their targets are assuming, someone's got to fix this system. And after being on this council for 20-some odd years, to read a strategy that says in a few years' time we will shut up shop in terms of building new council homes makes me want to weep. I'm not going to weep because I think we're going to fix this, but we've got to get the underpinnings of it right before we can fix it. And I believe in what we've gone through in the last year of trying to tackle the backlog of our existing stock, etc., and trying to get a really deep dive into the finances of our HRA. I feel more, it's bizarre, I feel more confident now that we could possibly deliver this, but the documents tell me we're not going to. But I think because we've got a lot of those foundations right, or if not transparent, it gives us a better shot. But the government is going to have a plan as how anyone in the affordable housing sector is going to deliver. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I'll just say a few words from the chair then. So there is a significant piece of lobbying work going on to try and make government more aware of the structural problems with HRAs across the country. This is led by Suffolk Council and other large stakeholders, but we're a part of it too. We're a part of this lobbying effort, and there are some hints, at least, that the government is listening. As Councillor Stringer said, the government has a stated aim of delivering 1.5 million homes over this parliamentary term. Many commentators have expressed the view that the crisis of affordability will only be solved by a much larger provision of council homes as part of that mix. And as Councillor Winch has said, our finances, if they continue on their current trajectory, do not allow us to build or acquire new homes in the future. So we do need a significant change in government thinking and government funding if we are to be part of delivering their ambition. So this report is a sobering read, but I'm confident that Deborah and her team will deliver for our residents. Nothing else from the Cabinet? Okay, we can then move to the vote. I'm not going to read out the whole recommendations, but we have recommendations 3.1 to 3.7, and I will now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 5 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. So we move on to item 9, paper MCA/24/35. This is the General Fund Financial Monitoring Q2 forecast. And again, I'll ask Councillor Winch to introduce the report.
This latest view shows, as I said earlier, a surplus of 6.7 million compared to a budgeted surplus of 5.2 million, a 29% increase over budget. The reason for this, if you look at it, our net expenditure is very close to budget. Our total funding, that's grants, business rates and council tax, is very close to budget, apart from the income from Freeport, where there's been a slight delay. The main reason for the change are around the financing elements. So we've seen an increase in the item 8 recharge to the HRA because of a full year effect of 5 million additional lending for last year and 8.2 in the current year. We've had the dividend from Gateway 14, which has reduced our short-term borrowings, and we've had interest receivable on short-term investments, and we didn't use the budget for this, so it's a little bit of a quirk. This is countered by the pooled funds in closure of UBS, a 500k loss, and a reduction in interest receivable from the pooled funds. But overall, the financing elements amount to a 1.7 above budget. So that's the reason for the favourable variance. If I look at the capital budget, the revised capital budget totals 10.7 million. That's a reduction of 14 million on the budget approved by the council. So we're going to achieve less than half of what we set out to do. The key items here are the Skills and Innovation Centre. The construction phase is now scheduled to take place next year. and therefore it's been reprofiled for next year. It's a complex project involving the Freeport, a lot of complex legal issues, planning process. We're now through that, and I'm confident it will be delivered mid-2026. We've drawn the loans to Mid-Suffolk Growth. We made a decision in July not to proceed with the last phase of the redevelopment of the former HQ because it was standard market housing, it had reasonable financial risk, and it wasn't something we thought the council should be doing. The new depot facility we've already talked about, we weren't able to locate a suitable site, so that has moved back in time. They're the main elements, and there's a couple of more detailed elements like the leisure contracts. Our earmarked reserves in the period have moved from 28.8 million to 50.4 million, increased by the Gateway 14 dividend and capital receipts. That's probably all I want to say at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a second for this report, please? Councillor Weller, thank you. Any questions from Cabinet members? Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Scarf, any questions from you? Councillor Scarf.
Thank you. Can I just point out in recommendation 3.2, it refers to a surplus of 6 million. So that needs a revision. Thank you. The surplus in this report is 6.698 million. If you compare that to the amount of council tax raised and demanded from residents of 7.222 million, that means that 92.7 pence in every pound taken from residents this year has not been spent, but it's been surplus. So my question is, with benefit of this report, do you agree with the view that the 2% increase that my group opposed was still the right thing to do or not?
Yes, because it's very easy to look in the back view mirror when you know what's happened. At the time, we were a new council and we wanted to make sure we proceeded cautiously. I think we had a good year the previous year and a very good year this year, and that's why we're recognising that with the council tax change.
Looking at page 90 in the report, there's a income line, business rates income from Freeport brackets pot C, which was budgeted at 240, but is actually coming at 38,000, and the explanation being about delays in valuation, etc. I mean, when I've driven past there recently, there seems to be plenty of trucks outside. It seems to be up and running. So what's just going on there?
My understanding it's the delay in the occupancy dates and us getting the business rates, but I don't know if anybody wants to come in with some detail there.
Yeah, it is. I think when we set the budget, we didn't set it correctly. So whilst the site is operational now, that money is starting to come through. The other element to take into account on this as well is we're still waiting for the valuation office to put the rating value on that as well. So at the moment we're just getting the money back from the government. There is a risk that rateable value could change. So it's a bit volatile at the moment, I would say.
I think I might have asked the question before, but when rateable value is determined, it will be backdated to the time of occupancy. And so will we accrue any money back to that date, even if we haven't received it in these accounts?
Yes, we will do, yeah.
I can continue, page 95. Let me just get it myself, 95. This shows, movements on reserves, and down towards the bottom of the reserves, investing in the district. We had £2 million set aside at the start of the year for the Cosy Homes project, and we're forecasting to spend 100,000 of that before March 25. I mean, this isn't a 20-year project, so was that just grossly overestimated, the take-up, do you think?
So we've recently relaunched Cosy Homes. I think when we started it, the proposition wasn't simple enough, and we're not the only people who struggled with this, because as you know, the County Council had to return significant sums of money for not getting this through the door quickly. We've now simplified the whole process, made that you self-certify in terms of your income. We're going to make it available to all pensioners, and it's targeted directly at council tax band D. Band D, EPCD. EPCD. So it's a much more tailored offering now, and we're expecting the uptake to be much more rapid than it has been. But fair point, it has been very slow and a bit frustrating.
On page 96, there's a heading, again I think under capital, for empty homes grant, and again I think the budget was 540,000, but forecast to spend 100,000 in the year, and the narrative talks about the sort of difficulties of sorting this out and perhaps even removing it in future. But I thought we were starting to use a big stick on residents to bring empty homes back into play. So if we only had a full-time equivalent of 0.1, which is half a day a week, it seems to be a disconnect here between what we were trying to do in terms of collect the money and, you know, our approach as set out there.
I'm going to ask Deborah to comment on this one.
So we do have a resource available who works on empty homes, as you're aware, but it's incredibly complex piece of work. I mean, yes, it's difficult, but we do continue to try and bring back empty homes, and we will carry on doing that. I mean, we've recently had a couple of really good successes in terms of empty properties that also needed significant work, and there was a lot of negative impact in the immediate sort of local community. So, you know, I think my summary is very complex area of work, and we will carry on, you know, fighting the fight, if you like.
And a final question, if I may. On page 103, it talks about finance costs in terms of relative to the revenue stream. And for the general fund, it's going up from 18.79% to 24.72% over the 4 years, which is obviously quite an increase, but I wasn't quite sure. Does that include all the capital ambition project finances, or is that just without it?
I believe it includes everything. So it does include everything, yeah.
Yeah, no further questions? Okay, thank you. So we can now open this item up for debate. Anyone wish to contribute to the debate? If not, then we can move directly to the vote. We have recommendations 3.1 and 3.2. The figure of 6 million should be 6.69. So that's the only amendment, yeah. And I will now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 5 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. So we move on to item 10 of the agenda, which is paper MCA 24/36, the Housing Revenue Account Financial Monitoring 24-25 Quarter 2 Forecast. And I will now invite Councillor Winch to introduce the report.
We've covered a lot of the general background when we looked at the budget and business plan, so I'm just going to stick to the numbers in this report. This report is showing a deficit of 2.3 million versus a budget of 0.9 million, a 1.3 million unfavourable variance and an underspend in the capital programme of 6.4 million. So starting with the revenue budget, broadly speaking, our income, that's rent, service charges, non-dwelling income, is where we thought it would be and on budget. Our direct costs are significantly above budget. So we've got 609k contract electrical testing. We're now testing every 5 years as opposed to every 10 years, so we've done more tests than previously, and this also leads to remedial work. We've got 467,000 ongoing impact of the backlog of repairs work going back to COVID and the impact of disruption during our transformation process and the use of agency staff. We've got 130k compensation for disrepair claims. This is a combination of catching up with retrospective claims that go back a long way and a knock-on for our generally poor complaints performance. We now have a disrepair surveyor and we're using external legal assistance to try and move this along a lot quicker. We've got 100k for contract heating, the transfer of a contractor that we had and the legacy from that, which wasn't working well. Nearly 100k on fire prevention because we've now got a team that has much better knowledge of what is required and we're doing more work as a consequence. That has been offset by a positive 423k from the original central transformation budget, but there's a significant overspend in direct costs. On depreciation, we've referred to before, but we've restated our depreciation charges and that's reflected in a favourable 591k. Our interest charges, if you net everything out, are just over $500,000 unfavourable, and that's the result of the work through of the way we were apportioning funding between the general fund and the HRA. And I think we're all assured that we've reached the bottom of that barrel now, yeah? So that won't be occurring again. The capital programme, there are mainly delays in new build schemes, but as a general statement, I believe we are now getting up. So what we've decided is everything that was sort of started, we need to get on with and get that finished. And I think we are making good progress. There have been delays, so we've got specific developments where you get complications, you know, asbestos and archaeological issues and things that are getting in the way of getting these out the door quickly. But I'm now very confident that we're going to get those back on track. We've also seen delays in our decarbonisation rollout as there's an enormous amount of pre-work that's required before you can actually press the button. So, conclusion overall, we're still running an unsustainable deficit for this year and reserves will just be over 5 million at the end of the year. As we discussed earlier, we anticipate another difficult financial year as we start to get on top of the service. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for that report, please? Councillor Stringer. Thank you. Any questions from Cabinet members? If not, Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Scarf, any questions from either of you?
Thank you, Chair. In the capital programme, the disabled adaptations to council dwellings, you're increasing the budget by 100,000, which personally I'm very pleased to see. But how confident are you that you will actually be able to deliver them, bearing in mind the occupational therapist situation? I mean, I had a council tenant who inquired about disabled adaptation, desperately needing one. Waited, I think, 9 months already and was told in September it'll be another 9 months. And I went through the housing team and got the exact position in the list and went back to the lady and she said, oh, well, if I'm that position in the list, that's fine. But what contribution does occupational therapist capacity make to this? Is this, are we able to deliver this extra, basically?
I'm going to make a quick comment and then I'll let Deborah come in. This is an area of extreme frustration to this administration that we have got people in real need and we're not reacting quick enough. I know there's a paper being put together on how we can improve both within the HRA and actually within the wider community because they're both linked issues. Do you want to comment, Deborah?
Thank you, Councillor Winch. So, as Councillor Winch said, we are reviewing the situation at the moment, and one of the things we're looking at is whether we can directly contract with private occupational health professionals. And the other thing we've started to do is we've started to install handrails for people without going through occupational health. So we've got our minor works surveyors, which we know can be trusted to put in handrails without going through that very lengthy process. So that will speed up those applications. But we're more than happy to come back when we've carried out the piece of work to understand what we can do to improve this. And we're in regular contact with Councillor Winch on the matter.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 113, which sort of sets out the variances and explanations, under service charges income, where we've been talking about how generally we're not recovering anything like the right amount, it says there's a reduction to service charge in some sheltered schemes following review. I'm just took by surprise that presumably then there must be some schemes that are very cost efficient and other ones that are where the costs are much, much higher than the income.
I believe this is the over-invoicing issue, yeah. So there were some schemes where they were over-invoiced and then we had to credit that back.
And looking at the cost side of the equation, so the housing management budget was 1.963 million and I'm forecasted now 1.91 million, so that's a welcome but small saving of 53,000. But when I go to the narrative section, it just seems to be a list of overspends there, so I'm a bit confused.
So, yeah, I take your point. Jenny's going to have a look.
Apologies, I've missed off the savings section of that commentary. I will add that in. Apologies. I just need to bring up my original file.
I've got to be honest, it was one of the few positive variances on this. I didn't.
Can I get back to you on that one? Thank you.
So I assume that section will be added in for subsequent versions of the report. Yeah. Any further questions? Thank you. Okay, so we can now open this item up for debate. Any comments or contributions from Cabinet members? Okay, if not, then we can get on the right page. Then we can move to the vote. So I will just read out this recommendation because it's fairly short. That subject to any further budget variations that arise during the rest of the financial year, the projected deficit on the HRA of 2.304 million and the underspend on the capital programme of 6.41 million referred to in Appendix A of the report be noted. I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 5 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business of the meeting. Just to state that the next Cabinet meeting is scheduled for Monday the 7th of January 2025 at 9:30 a.m. Are we in here again? Or I'm not sure. That will be confirmed. And can I just wish you all a peaceful and happy Christmas when you eventually get there. Thank you.